everyone, welcome to part 2 of our writing CPD for the new structure for 2021. Hopefully tonight's CPD will run you through a few of the writing top tips that I have used in my own practice and other practitioners across school have used, and hopefully it will refresh you on some of the writing basics that some have that seem to have got lost along the way. So there are a few things that we're going to be covering in tonight's session, so I'm going to carry on flicking through. The intentions of the session is to share best teaching practice and strategies for writing, so basically the top tips as I've just mentioned. I'm also going to be sharing some examples of writing exemplifications and standard banks for each year group, and we'll also be talking about the whole school writing assessment piece, which all children are going to complete week commencing 15th of March. So, outlines of tonight's session. I want to talk through the importance of self-assessment during the lesson. Self-assessment is not an afterthought with writing. I want to share some samples of teacher marking, which is linked directly to assessment grids and actioning next steps for children. I want to speak around high quality and purposeful annotations. So are we doing annotations as part of that sequence that is moving learning on? If we're not, then they need to have more meaning and weighting behind them. They need to be of more value, because we run the risk of getting in the rut of doing annotations where children are just labelling title, subheading, and actually they know these features already. So actually making sure that whatever we are putting in that annotation session is of real value. Opportunities for children to conjure up vocabulary within the lesson. I'm going to look at how we can do that. We're going to look at some of the strategies that you can use to teach SPAG and different aspects of SPAG within your sentence stacking lessons. Obviously, the core focus in the new policy is to build children up to write sustained pieces of writing within that SPAG session. But there are other ways that you can sort of manipulate that SPAG session so that children are still writing at length and they're not just doing sentence type after sentence type after sentence type. So I want to explore some of that tonight. I want to look at using high quality texts as models. So actually sometimes quality is more important than quantity. So quite often children are overfaced with text that they're given. They could be given a huge page to annotate, and actually your most vulnerable children, they only get through the first 3 lines because there's just that much text there. And actually, if we really think about the text that we're sharing with the children, even having a snippet of a text, a paragraph can still have real value, and it can prompt really in-depth discussion. And finally, I want us to talk around audience and purpose for writing and how we make sure children are aware of that. So they are the main things that we're going to be covering, but most of this is going to be centered on sharing examples of work with you through best practice. So first off is the text annotation. So over the side, I've put some examples of text annotations, and they're all very different. I think the one thing to bear in mind with text annotations is that they shouldn't be specific. For your lower children, they shouldn't be generic, sorry, that for your lower children, they might be quite generic in terms of, oh, this is the title, this is a headline. But as they get higher up the school and as children are more familiar with that genre, we should be expecting more within those annotations. So actually, this is a headline. In this text, this is what the headline says, and the impact on the reader is. So we're not just accepting, especially in Key Stage 2, the word headline as part of the annotation. We want children to unpick the text, which is why they've got to link whatever feature they are finding directly to that text. So actually I've identified headline, but now I'm going to comment on that a little bit more, and the teacher marking should be prompting that. So for example, on this piece here, which you'll just about be able to see, a child has annotated noun phrase. Now in some year groups, children will leave it at that. It's a noun phrase. That's what I've identified as part of that diary entry. But actually, if we think about that, children should be capable of talking about the impact of that noun phrase. So rather than just putting noun phrase at the side, they might be putting a noun phrase which is used to give the reader details of the newborn baby. And that newborn baby bit is an explicit link to that text. So it's not generic, it's specific to the text. I also wanted to talk about the fact that actually children can tick off things as they go. So there might be a need in those text annotations to talk about, well, actually, what are the features of a diary entry? what are the features of a narrative, a non-narrative, what are the features of a non-chronological report, and children might need to jot those things down, which you can see is in this example here, a short list at the start of the lesson, and as they are annotating, they can go back and they can self-assess and they can tick those features off. I would also say that children need to be critically evaluating the text alongside staff. So when you are choosing your text, you need to be thinking, is the quality there in this text? So is the vocabulary there? Is the aspects of punctuation and grammar there? Are the features there that I want children to be really secure and tight on? Because if they're not, then the annotation text is not serving its purpose. So to support with that, I wanted us to think about the length of text, which I've already kind of mentioned. So you can see in the first example here, that's quite a lengthy text, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that as long as the learning objective is being achieved. So here we've got other examples of annotations with text, but you can see that they're much shorter snippets because that serves the purpose of that lesson. On this bottom one here, this was actually a different spin on annotating text. So it doesn't just have to be your most traditional model. Here's an annotation of a text. If you know that children are quite competent in that genre and they've seen that kind of thing over and over again as they progress through the school, you might want to switch it up a bit to support metacognitive thinking. So in this example, I think this one was character description. So children were given a really poor character description and a really great character description. So we're given two snippets, both character descriptions, but in that annotation session, they annotated what wasn't great about the first one. In the second one, they annotated what was really strong. So it was still an annotation lesson, it just had a different spin on it, and it helped children to compare and contrast what a good one looks like and what a really poor one looks like. So it's just something to think about. In those annotation lessons, sometimes we can get stuck in the rut of, oh, I'm going to print another text off, here's a model, we'll annotate it, we won't go any further with it. There's still opportunity to be creative within those annotation sessions. Another idea for the annotation sessions, if you were doing newspaper reports, for example, do you really need to present the whole text in one bulk to children? Perhaps the text could be dissected up and actually the children cut out the text. So they cut out the headline, they cut out the subheading, they cut out the lead-in paragraph, and actually they stick in those different bits in the correct places in their book, and they annotate each feature around it, so you can actually dissect the text as well. It's still annotating, so it's just something to think about. The next slide talks around self-assessment and the importance of self-assessment. I feel really, really strongly that self-assessment is not an afterthought. So yes, children have that success criteria in their book. Yes, it's there for them to refer to. It's not something that gets left until the end of the lesson. The teacher should be creating opportunities all throughout that lesson for children to pause, to stop, to breathe, to take a minute, to look at their work. Have I included X, Y, and Z of my success criteria? And there are other ways that you can reinforce that as the class teacher. It doesn't just have to solely be that top success criteria. Obviously, we know that's a permanent feature of the structure and that goes in the books day in, day out. But actually, in the margin, children might have a mini success criteria as directed by that member of staff, and they might be colour coding as they go that actually in this paragraph, yes, I've ticked that off in the margin. Yes, I've done that. That's in my paragraph. I'm triangulating that. I keep going back to that margin. What do I need to include next? So self-assessment is very much a part of that writing process every single lesson. And that's whether it's a sentence stacking lesson, whether it's a paragraphing lesson, whether it's a lesson that's based purely on a practice write and the writing gets sustained length. And giving children the opportunity to self-assess through the sentence stacking lessons. So before building up to that sustained writing within that SPAG sentence stacking lesson, you can see here an example is where it's been modelled by the teacher that children were being asked to do a 3ED sentence. So the teacher modelled it and the children went through and they self-assessed that it had all of the correct features of that sentence. So there's evidence again of self-assessment even on a smaller level. It doesn't only have to appear where there is success criteria for a lesson that's written at sustained length. So please do bear that in mind, because that one is a really great one, and it really helps children to unpick all of the different word classes, all of the different features, and once they've got that model in their book at the start of the session, you can then go back and refer to that if that's the focus of the session. So actually, have I got 3 adjectives? in this next sentence that I've written, and they will automatically then start to do that within their work the more that that's articulated to them, whether they're applying it to sustained writing or whether they're doing it individually. So I've spoken around ongoing self-assessment. It's not an afterthought, which is what I've already mentioned, because when it is an afterthought, at that point it becomes too late for the child to change the direction of their learning and the direction of their progress. So obviously our intervention marking really supports self-assessment for children. So actually the teacher intervening at that point is stopping the child going off track. But if the child is only using that overarching success criteria at the end of the lesson, it's too late by that point to think, right, what have I not included? What do I need to do next? And I would say that teachers need to make sure that they are providing those opportunities continually throughout that lesson, because it allows children a moment to reflect. It encourages them to slow down and go back against their work and think, have I included these features? Because if I haven't, then what am I writing about? Because the purpose of this writing, the purpose of today's lesson, is that actually these are the features that I apply. Another thing to think about here, and I think this is really important, is how many times, how many opportunities do you create within your writing lesson where children are given the opportunity to think about what they've just written? And I think that's a really innocent question, but I think it's a really powerful one. Because actually, when I think about the way that I teach, and I do this quite naturally now, but I didn't initially, I'd say, right, children, give an example of a 3ED sentence, they'd write one down. And we would accept the first thing that they had written down. Yeah, that's absolutely great. Well done, you've got all the features. And I think it's about training children that actually, yeah, that is really great, but you could still make it better. So edit it, go back. Which vocabulary stands out that you don't really like? What can you improve? Go back, edit it, maybe write it a second time, write it a third time. So today, for example, we were writing headlines in Year 6 because we're doing newspaper reports. So children had a task of writing 3 headlines after they had annotated features of headlines, and they'd unpicked it. And my challenge to the children was, first of all, write me a full sentence of what you want that headline to be. We know headlines aren't in full sentences, but go and write me a sentence about what you want it to be. The second stage of that process, and this is still the first example, was right now, I want you to eliminate all of those words that have no purpose or serve no meaning, have no impact on the reader, and I want you to edit that first sentence. So that was the second stage. So by that point, they'd got 2 different sentences. By the third stage, they were then at the point where they were looking at the vocabulary. Had they included things like a play on words, a pun? Had they included alliteration? If they hadn't, they'd got a third opportunity to acknowledge that and do something about it. So actually, although I was asking children to write 3 headlines for me, by the outcome of that lesson, they'd all written 9 effectively, because they'd started off quite loose in their ideas, and each example became tighter and tighter. So for that one headline, they had 3 attempts to create a polished version, if you like. So it's just something to think about. How often in your lessons are you stopping children and asking them to go back to that piece of work, to up-level it, to edit it, to pick out the bits that jump out like a sore thumb and give them the opportunity to change it? And how often are you giving that opportunity in your dialogue as well? So actually, that's a fantastic sentence that you've just given me, Bob. You used some fantastic adjectives there. I wonder if you could replace this adjective, because I think you can do better with this one, with a more powerful word, and then generate that as a whole class discussion. So actually, who else thinks they could think of a better word that might be included in that sentence for Bob, which would make his work have even more impact on the reader? So just think about allowing children those opportunities to build on and craft their writing, because that's what we should be seeing in the lesson. Okay, on this next page here, I've also just put on some other work samples. So we have got 2 samples of work here, and the emphasis I want to place here is that sometimes in a lesson, children need a bit of a recap. They need a recap over what they're writing about and what the main events of the story were, just to refresh their knowledge so that they can progress forward within that lesson. And there's no reason why children can't jot down bullet points and notes as directed by the teacher. This is an example here, actually, of a plan for a play script. And what I wanted to share this for was because plans don't have to be in that rigid structure. Yes, we want to see that sequence unfolding. We want to be able to see a story unfolding within that plan. And I suppose this is more for your older children, but sometimes plans can restrict children. So actually, this is a plan for a play script. You can see that children have put cast list, they've put the settings, the different settings they're going to use. Down at the bottom, they've started to think about the stage directions that they're going to put in, and they're now in brackets. So they don't have to always be on an actual planning structure or a planning template. So that is something to bear in mind as well, is that actually children have more freedom when they set it out in the way that they want to, and it minimises and reduces worksheets. And again, it's encouraging children to write at a sustained length, because they think they're planning, but actually all they're doing, they're constantly writing throughout that session. They get to choose how they set it out. Some children might set it out, if it's a story, with a bit of a squiggly line going all the way through the page, and they start at the beginning and they write notes a bit like a road. And children really love getting the teeth stuck into different ways to plan. So that again is something to think about. Obviously, you've got to be careful in the way you articulate that. That would be much easier with older children. Your lower children down school might need more of a structure, but as children are trained, the more they are familiar with those sorts of strategies and those sorts of approaches to planning, the better they will become at it. The other thing I wanted to mention on here is that actually teacher marking should make explicit links with the assessment grid, with the genre, with your knowledge as class teacher of what that child needs next to progress. So on here, you can see why do stage directions go in brackets. So I am now extending the thinking of that child. They know that there are stage directions, but what's the purpose of them going in the brackets? And children can then respond to that. So comments like great, well done are needed, and I definitely think they're needed. Children need to hear that praise and they need to know that they're on the right track, but they also need to be balanced with explicit teacher marking and assessment of, well, actually this is great, but next time, and I'm linking this to my knowledge of where you are on your assessment grid, this is what I'd like to see next. And that can even feed into the lesson the next day, if you know what's coming up that next day as class teacher. So actually I know that tomorrow we're going to be writing about the setting and play script. So perhaps I want to extend their thinking around that, ready for the next lesson. So just be aware that comments like, yes, well done, great, you included all of these things is fantastic, but we still need to be moving learning on through that marking process. So some examples of marking, some examples of plans. So in this one here, they're actually two play scripts. So this one's another version of a play script, and it's literally, it's messy thinking, and that's what children need. Next one, so talking around marking, this one here looks at marking in more sustained pieces of writing. So actually children have got this overarching success criteria, but down the side here, they've also got a success criteria for themselves that will help them navigate that right. So actually I know in this first paragraph, I'm going to set myself a mini success criteria, and I'm going to make sure that there are rhetorical questions in there, so that when the teacher goes to that paragraph, yes, I can see rhetorical questions. That child has then gone back and ticked off that they've included that. They can forget about that now for a minute. They can focus on the next thing on their list. So actually, I've now said I'm going to include a 3-bad dash or formal language, and that helps children steer their writing as they're going. So again, I'm constantly creating those opportunities in a lesson. Okay, go back to your margin, whatever you said you were including within that paragraph, go back and check, have you included those things? If you haven't, then the quality of your writing is not there, because you're almost writing aimlessly. It's there to guide you. So it's really important that we are constantly creating those opportunities throughout the lesson. The other thing I would say here as well is note how the marking explicitly links to the key terminology that children need to be familiar with. So it's things like, I can see personal pronouns, I can see questions which are rhetorical, I can see paragraphs, I can see apostrophes for contraction. They are clear links to the assessment grid, and that is about staff understanding what's on that assessment grid, knowing the correct grammatical terms, and that should be reflected in your marking. Because the more that children see those words, if a child can learn the term describing word, they can learn it's an adjective. It's just about how you articulate it. So actually, if I'm saying to, I don't know, a child in year 6, actually we use a pair of brackets for extra information, if they can learn and retain that, they should also be able to know and be able to tell me that actually we call that parenthesis. and I can be then articulating and making that clear in my marking, because the more children see that key terminology, the more they will become aware of it, and the more they will start to use those correct grammatical terms. So that's just food for thought on the marking. Another idea as well, English skills books shouldn't be a polished version. That is where the writer's craft takes place. So it's where all of those ideas come to fruition for children. So we shouldn't be saying, oh, that's messy. Obviously, there are standards in presentation. We've all got a benchmark with that. But actually allow children to edit, allow them to cross out words and make them better and provide those opportunities for them, because they're never going to get better else. And I think it's that notion of accepting that, no, the first time I write something down, that's not my final version. And teachers setting that standard and children following it. That actually, yeah, you might have finished your work, you might have finished that first paragraph, and that's absolutely fantastic. But have you been away? Have you gone back and edited that? Because if you haven't, then you haven't really understood the purpose of the writing session, because writing sessions are about crafting, they're about editing, and that's the most important part of that session. It's thinking about it and it's reflecting on what you've done. And what it does as well is it helps children to refocus on their work. So actually, if they are writing aimlessly, once they're encouraged to go back and look over that work, they can think, well, actually, I haven't included these things on the success criteria, or actually I've gone on a bit of a tangent there, and actually this word here that I dropped in doesn't really have the desired impact on the reader as perhaps what I would have wanted it to. So it's just another, again, food for thought. Quick pre-teaching of key points, which I've already mentioned. So here, there's an example. There were some notes that we made for the independent write, which I thought would help children based on the assessment for learning across the week, perhaps on things that I'd picked up in the practice write. So actually, speech needs to be from the viewpoint of the kernel. So I was reminding children of that. They were writing from the viewpoint of the kernel, because some children were getting mixed up with that. The kernel's persuading men from the estate to join the army. So I'm reminding them of the purpose again. There's no harm in making quick notes at the start of the lesson with the children, just to refresh them and to remind them and make sure that they're all on the same page. Again, this is an example of a plan. They had a look at structure for a plan. So again, no, it's not a worksheet. It's literally paragraph 1, outline, main ideas. Paragraph 2, I'm going to talk about the Pals regiments for the army. Paragraph 3, I'm going to talk about the danger to England if you don't enlist in this army. And children went away and they mapped out their own plan based on the success criteria that they had been given and what we had discussed, but then they took it in their own direction. Another thing that I wanted to mention, some great examples of pre-teach quizzes here. So from across the week, it was clear that modal verbs weren't something that children were confident with. So there was a pre-teach quiz that happened at the start of the lesson, asking children what modal verbs were. Can you identify the modal verb? Which modal verb had more weighting in terms of its power in the impacts on the reader? So again, there are opportunities within SPAG sessions for short burst questions to stick in, and that will inform your assessment for learning. And obviously that's low stakes, high impacts. Children don't see that as a test, they see it as a bit of fun, but it can really aid your sort of modelling within the writing process. I've already mentioned the plans, but I think it's important that children write their plans out in a way that makes sense to them. Obviously that initial structure needs to be there, but there is also no reason that self-assessment can't take place during that planning session. So actually you can see here, this is quite a neat plan. Paragraph 1 is going to have all these ideas in, but still in paragraph 1, although it's note form, have I got ideas for first person? Yes, I have, because I've ticked it off. Have I got a range of sentences in my plan for paragraph 1? Yes, I have, because I've ticked it off. Have I got X, Y, and Z in my plan? Yes, I have, because I've ticked it off and I've made sure that I have. Same here, you can see that the teachers also repeated and reinforced the things that they think that the child's done well. So you've got the self-assessment from the child, where they've ticked off what they think they've included. Then you've also got that reinforcement, that quality assurance from the teacher. So actually, yes, I can see you've included an adjective. I can see you've included 2A, like you said you were going to. And again, it all comes back to self-assessment. Also, here at the bottom, an opportunity where children go away and up-level a piece of their work. So they've created their own box with a different, in the style of our marking process, obviously a different colour, not yellow. They've gone away, they've carefully selected through peer assessment a chunk of writing, a sentence that they are going to build on and develop, and then they've gone away and done that. So it's creating opportunities for those sorts of things. Here, I want you to think about considering what features children will need exposure to and knowing how you'll execute that, because there are so many different innovative ways that you can execute different lessons. So I know, for example, one of the big things for children in writing a story is getting the balance between action, dialogue and description. So actually, one of your sentence stacking lessons or one of your jigsaw lessons, depending on which feature you're writing through, might be a simple grid that looks like something like this. So actually, what is the action taking place? What description are you going to use? And what's the dialogue? And it just helps children to compartmentalise what they're going to write rather than a whole page of speech, because then they've got action dripped in with a bit of description, followed by a bit of a dialogue, and then they just keep following that cycle, and it helps to balance the narrative. Think about your jigsaw lessons. So here's an example of a headline lesson under the new structure. So actually the focus was, it was a jigsaw lesson, we were writing through the features of headlines. So children went away, they looked at different samples of headlines, and then they went on to, at the end of that lesson, to write their own headlines, gearing them up for the practice write. But what they needed initially was to understand, although they'd unpicked the headline in the annotation session, they still needed to go back and unpick different headlines, because actually headlines use puns, they use play on words, they use alliteration. So children needed that understanding, and they probably didn't have that level of depth in that first session. So that was sort of combined within the jigsaw lesson as well. And again, you can see where possible that's been linked to the class text or the theme of Greeks. So that the books aren't disjointed, they are cohesive over time with all of the rest of the learning taking place within that year group. And I know that that's not always possible, but where it is possible, that's what we should be aiming for. So it really is worth thinking about the quality of the text and the quality of the resources that you are sharing. One of the things that children did with that activity, and again, it was writing through the features, before they went on to write their headlines, they had quite a heated discussion about which ones they thought were the most powerful headlines and why they thought that. They sort of ranked the headlines in order, which is what this child's done, and then they gave reasoning as to why that one was more powerful than the other. Was it because of the play on words? Was it because it was a bit more shorter than the others? It was short, sharp, snappy, whereas some of them were a little bit more difficult to follow, and as the reader you wouldn't want that, and it was always bringing it back to the reader. But you can see the quality of the resources there. This one's really, really important. So vocabulary is massively underestimated. If you were to spend 5 minutes at the start of your lesson setting the benchmark for what vocabulary you want to see children using within that lesson, I can guarantee you that your writing outcomes would be so much stronger by the end of that lesson. And there are so many different ways that you can do that. So I've taken some samples from, well, this was from a Year 4 display actually. So some Year 4 teachers might recognise this. So there were some keywords put up on the board and children were asked to use that within the session. So I would then expect to see that in the writing, not all of them, but they were there for children to use. Here's another example. So children were being asked to write about expanded noun phrases, and this was to add detail and description to writing. It was about a key character. But before children could do that within that sentence stacking lesson, they needed, because it was a character description, they needed words to describe hair, to describe the face of the character, to describe clothing, to describe the height. And once they'd got that groundwork, they were then away. If that had not taken place, that 5-minute, 10-minute activity, the word choices and the language within those expanded noun phrases would have been quite restricted and quite limited. And you can be really creative with that, because actually you could give points to children. So actually we've all come up with these words together. If anyone gets the word chiseled in their description today, I'm going to give you 10 points. And they could even put the points in the margin as they go, because that's the hardest word to get in today. If anyone includes the word nice today, you get 1 point. And it's little tips like that that will keep children going and to keep them thinking. So vocabulary is a really important one. So thinking about ways which you can expose them to that. That could just be as well, it could be a simple list at the start of a lesson. So actually the key vocabulary that I want you to use today, you jot this in your book, I want you to see these 5 words in your writing today. Sentence stacking lessons. So obviously we're aiming for children to write at a sustained length. So whether that's application to paragraphs, and I know we've said we don't want to just see a list of sentence types where children repeat sentences over and over and over again. So this is an example of a sentence stacking lesson. And you can see here, there's the key vocabulary that we want children to write. So this particular lesson was show, not tell. So first of all, children unpicked what actually it meant, show, not tell, in writing. They did that with the teacher. Bit of a crib sheet to refer to in the lesson. Then actually, what are we doing show, not tell on today? We're going to do show, not tell on our character. So we want to think about all of the different things that we know about this character. So we know that they're a risk taker. We know that they're a loyal friend. She's an overthinker. She's a thrill seeker. She's an adventure seeker. She's an optimist. So all of these different words then fed into the SPAG activity that they did, which was a simple table, really visual. Again, they're still writing at sustained length, but actually it was a really visual approach rather than children just writing out show, not tell sentences. So I've got the don't tell bit. So Isabella was brave. We know that that's not going to have impact on the reader. So I'm now going to convert that and say that Isabella quickly rushed to her room and tried to find anything to help disguise herself as a boy. The rest of it there says something about the dangers that she would face because she's going into the Forbidden Forest. So actually, just by thinking about that very short, simple sentence for the don't tell, that child has been able to go away now and think, well, actually, how could I make that more powerful? And that's a simple table. So there's no reason that you can't be creative with your SPAG sessions and your sentence stacking lessons. But I would also say, pay attention to the fact that most of these models that are being provided tonight, they're not worksheets. It's about writing at sustained length. It's about children writing, getting their ideas in the book, and worksheets are very, very limited because all of this work is centred around the teacher input and the teacher models. This one here, I wanted to talk about the learning environment. So I've just taken some snapshots of successful English walls. I did have a nosy around school yesterday, so you could find any more, but we are really early doors in coming back to school. But this is the expectation for your English learning walls, is that actually there is a wealth of models that outlines that journey for the teaching sequence for that week. So any child could go to that learning wall and they could use the ideas. So actually, you can see on this learning wall here, it's covered in teacher models. You've got your annotation, you've got ideas around word classes, you have got an actual model from the teacher where there's self-assessment that's been shown, where they've done a whole class model. But that is the expectation. There shouldn't be a room that we go into now where the walls are empty. Those walls should be covered because every lesson there should be a teacher input on that flip chart paper, and that flip chart paper just then gets whacked up on your learning wall for children to refer to. So I hope that that bit makes sense. And I will talk a bit more around teacher models on the next page. And I think that is the key thing now with this writing structure, whereas initially it wasn't deeply rooted in teacher demonstrations. So perhaps not having as much on your learning wall, we would have perhaps gotten away with a little bit more. But because this is so centred on teacher modelling within the session, your learning walls should be full. This is an example of a teacher model here. And I wanted to share this one because I think it's really important that actually, whatever you're asking the children to do, you're modelling yourself. So obviously, I've mentioned around self-assessment as an ongoing tool to support writing, but actually this has also been reflected in the teacher model. So you can see writing at sustained length with the children's ideas, and we've got a bit of editing, so adding different things in as we've gone along. But the biggest thing is that that self-assessment is there. I'm literally annotating that passage with the children for the things I've asked them to include. And you can see down the side, as I would ask them to do in the margin, they are ticking off what they've included or what I've included rather, and we're making that decision together. So actually, they're hearing me have that dialogue with them. So actually, on my success criteria year 4, it says that I'm going to include POSAM. Have I included POSAM? If I haven't, I need to think about that next. What have I included? And I'm going to tick that off. But you can see really clearly on the modules that I am teaching that self-assessment to the children. And that's what I would expect to see within your sessions as well. That on those models as well, all of those different tools for self-assessment are there for children. So you're actively modelling basically what you're expecting to see from the children. This is the final thing in terms of writing tips and tricks. So one of the really important things is that children are able to articulate who the audience is and what the purpose for writing is. So every classroom now, as of next week, as of Monday, needs to have one of these templates up on the wall. So this will allow children to understand who they're writing as, who they're writing for, and what the purpose of that write is. And each genre, that needs to be changed. A bit like the fire assembly laminated cards, this will be displayed up in the room. So who am I writing as? Actually, I'm writing as the Colonel from Private Peaceful. Who am I writing for? I'm writing for an audience because actually I want to recruit men to join my army. So I'm writing to the young boys who've just turned 16 from the estate in the local community. So that's who I'm writing for. But what's the purpose? Is it to inform? Is it to entertain? Or is it to recount? So discussing actively with the children at the start of that genre, who am I writing as? Who am I writing for? And then your purpose. So is it to inform, entertain, or is it to recount? And it's making sure that you're constantly referring back to that card within the session. So that is a new addition. And that's something I'd like all classes to have up on the board. And that really is it for the top tips and tricks for writing. The next thing I'm moving on to now, and this won't take long at all, here are some writing exemplifications. So I have been working on a standards bank for each year group, because that's the one thing that we're missing at Ash Green. So that's why I asked for progress books for different year groups. And I've gone away and I've basically produced a set of standards for each year group. So year 1 up to year 6. And within that standards bank, there are 3 samples of a greater depth child, 3 samples of an expected, 3 of a vulnerable, all of different genres, which you can see. And what I'd like teachers to do, I'm going to send that out this week. I'd like teachers in year group pairs to get together however you see fit. You can do it remotely or however you want to. And I'd welcome feedback on those things, because you know your classes better than me as well. You know the expectations of your year group, especially if you've been in there quite a while. So I'm not expecting you to go away and completely edit it all. I'm just asking you to glance over it. Does it look reasonable? Does it look fair? Bounce it back to me with any recommendations and any feedback that you want acting on. And then they can hopefully support teacher assessment and moderations. Whole school writing assessment piece will happen week commencing the 15th of March, so next week. So all children will be completing a narrative. It'll be a cold write. There will be teacher input. It'll just be a one-off lesson and it will be in the progress books. The theme of that is to be confirmed at tonight's staff meeting, but it will be a whole school piece and children will be completely unaided other than the input. They'll be asked to just write so that we can see, we can benchmark children basically. So in terms of key messages, self-assessment should be evident and ongoing throughout every session. The learning environment should be full of modules, and I will be looking at that next week. I'll be expecting to see English rules covered in writing modules. Modules by the teacher should reflect expectations of the children. So if your writing models aren't of the quality that they should be, don't expect to see that in your children's books because you won't. Quality of the text, and careful, innovative ways to execute the activities. So there's a real opportunity within this new structure to be really adventurous, to be a bit of a risk taker in terms of resources and how you present it. So please do that, because the more creative and innovative you are, the more children will get out of it. Teacher marking, and this is a key one, needs to be grammatically accurate. It needs to be tight and it needs to move learning on. So know your assessment grids, know what those next steps are for your children. And then finally, in terms of actions, the writing sequence should now be in action. So you should have made headway with either a non-narrative or a narrative sequence with your success criteria in your books. There will be a learning environment walk with an explicit focus next week on teacher modules. I will also be looking for the Allen Peake sentence types and the writing intentions discussion prompt sheet, which is that one there. So I'll be going around each classroom and checking for those things next week, which all these things can be found on Staff Share, and I will email them over again as well. So please make sure those things are up. And please make sure that each day you're using that flip chart paper to go up on your learning wall and to provide active models for the children. Writing exemplifications I'm going to email out this week. I've just got some slight tweaks to finish with certain year groups. Then I'm going to email them out. I'm going to ask class teachers to get those back to me with any recommendations by the 19th. Then hopefully we're just in time to feed into moderations. And then obviously I will then share the finalised writing policy now that we've had both staff meetings with all staff, probably next week sometime. I'm meeting with Charlotte and Emma this week, and we're going to be looking at early years and how that can tie in. And once we've done that, there will then be the new policy that will be uploaded to the website. But I hope you found it useful. They are just some top tips and tricks, and I hope to see some of those things in action. And as I say, this will be uploaded to YouTube if you want to come back to it for ideas. Please make sure that you do use that channel because it will be helpful, and I am regularly going to be uploading to it. Thank you.